books. Hello and welcome to Intoxicated Masculinity. If it's Wednesday, we have a cocktail video coming at you, or today, we do not have a cocktail video coming at you. We're going to do something a little bit different. Actually, quite a bit different, because I'm not going to have a cocktail. I am, however, going to have something. So this is a Blanton's I just got. I'm not actually a huge fan of Blanton's, but this is my second to last letter before I finish up the set. That's kind of cool. So, I've been talking about doing this for a little while, and today we are going to do a tier ranking of cocktail books. I've acquired a lot of cocktail books over the years, and I'm not going to go through all of them. There's some of them that I've got that are newer, and I haven't really had a chance to go through as thoroughly as I would like to. Other ones I just don't have anything interesting to say about. We are going to go through all the ones that I use a fair amount of the time, and that I refer to a fair amount of the time. And so we're going to start off with some honorable mentions. Alright, so for the honorable mentions section, I'm actually not doing, it's kind of a little bit different. These are all historical cocktail books. And I kind of feel like putting them in a tier listing is kind of weird, because how do you compare a historical cocktail book versus a modern one? And I think it's just a little strange. So we're just going to kind of talk about a few of the ones that I have. The first one is Old Mr. Boston Deluxe. This one I like. This is from 1968. My wife got it for me. And I think it's an interesting to look at where cocktail culture was at that point. Unfortunately, where cocktail culture was in the 60s wasn't great. But when you're looking at sort of the evolution of a cocktail over a period of time, it's really good to look at stuff like this. So this is a good one to have around. And again, these aren't on the tier list, but they're ones that most of these I would recommend picking up, if you can find them. This is Dr. Siegert's Angostura Bitters. This was originally a pamphlet. The nice thing about these, and I've shown these on camera before, you can pick these up off of Amazon. What they are is essentially just photocopies of the original pamphlet. You can kind of see, and it's nice because they're very cheap. I mean, most of these are about $5 or $10, and you get the original. So this is the Angostura Bitters original cocktail book. So obviously he's going to talk a lot about cocktails using Angostura Bitters, but most cocktails do. All right, the next one I'll talk about is the Old Waldorf Astoria Bar book. This is from the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. This is from 1935. So this is basically just post-Prohibition. And Prohibition obviously had a very significant impact on cocktail culture in the United States. Obviously alcohol was officially illegal. However, everybody was still drinking. And so this is sort of, this and the other book I'm going to talk about, although it's not from the US, is sort of reflective of all the evolution that happened in cocktail culture over the course of Prohibition, so that, the 13 years. And this is just a good one. You can find sort of earlier versions of a lot of cocktails. This is one I look at very, very often. So next is Jerry Thomas. It's Bartender's Guide or Bon Vivant's Guide. There's a few different names that kind of came out under. So this is essentially the first cocktail book. This was released in 1862. There's been updated versions throughout history. And this one, like the Waldorf and like the other one, is the same thing where I got these on Amazon, where they're essentially just photocopies of the original book. This is really good just kind of for historical context. So this is going to be the first version of many, many cocktails. They will look very different. In many cases, they will look a lot simpler. But this is a really good cocktail book to have if you really want to go back to the very dawn of kind of cocktail culture, and I think it's good to have around. The best one in my mind is Harry Craddock. We've talked about this book a million times on this channel. So this is 1930 from the Savoy Hotel in London. Obviously they did not have Prohibition there, thankfully. But it is sort of, if you want to go back to the earliest versions of modern cocktails, this will have you covered. And so if you want to see, for example, how some cocktail changed throughout, especially like the 1950s and 1960s, and now has changed more given the sort of current cocktail renaissance. This is a good way to kind of get back to basics. And it just has a ton of recipes in here of a lot of really, really important cocktails. So Savoy Hotel Cocktail Book, again, it's not in the tier ranking because I'm not putting these historical books in the tier ranking, but if I was, that would definitely be on the top. But let's go to our first tier, which is our lowest tier. I was originally not planning on doing an F tier, because I don't think it's really helpful to just say, screw that book. I think most cocktail books have some value. As you're going to see in my D tier list, there's a bunch of books there that I don't particularly care for myself, but they certainly have value, and I'm not saying I necessarily recommend them, but I don't sort of say, oh, don't, stay away from those. These I do. All three of these books are being ranked in the F tier for exactly the same reason. So we have Tequila Mockingbird, we have Dungeon Meister, and we have True Blood, Drinks and Bites. These books are all guilty of the same thing, and that is they are essentially just a novelty. Tequila Mockingbird is just basically the same cocktail, but they just give it some kind of a clever name. And I put clever in very heavy air quotes there. Dungeon Meister is the same way. So here they're being given more Dungeons and Dragons themed cocktail names, but you're just getting the same old cocktails. So you're not going to get anything out of these books. I mean, just any regular cocktail, the 1001 cocktails, those type of books, they're going to serve you much better than these will. This is just a couple of very not clever jokes with some cocktail recipes that you could get anywhere else. And so, Tequila Mockingbird, Dungeon Meister, and True Blood are going in my F tier. Okay, so now on to D tier. So these books are not failures by any means. They are not ones that I would particularly recommend, but there is probably something about these that does have some value. First one is Drinking with Democrats. This kind of got one echelon above F tier. I think there is some interesting information in here. I don't know that the cocktails are all that useful, but it's not going to damage your cocktail game. And if you are a Republican, then you probably would put this in F tier. I believe there is a Republican one too, but I'm not one, so I didn't buy it. So again, wouldn't really recommend it, but if you see it on the shelf for super cheap, maybe something to just kind of have around. The next one is one I'm not going to call people out or anything. This is The Way of the Cocktail. I was very interested in this book when I saw it was coming out. There is a very unique and interesting cocktail culture in Japan, one with which I am not nearly familiar enough, and I got this book to try and kind of get into that a little bit more, and most of the recipes I tried in here I did not like. And it's not in the way of, there's certain things where, like, okay, maybe that flavor profile doesn't match. It's not that. The cocktails just weren't well balanced. I didn't care for them. I'm sure there are good cocktails in here, but the thing is, when you have a cocktail book and you make 2 or 3 cocktails out of it and all of them don't taste good and don't feel balanced, you're not in a huge rush to go back and try the other recipes. So yeah, Way of the Cocktail, kind of disappointing. Dale DeGroff is really famous cocktailier, bartender, knows a million things more about cocktails than I ever will. I don't like this book. I feel like it's this from a little while ago. I think this is from the early 2000s. Sorry, 2008. So the cocktail culture and the sort of the cocktail movement wasn't quite where it is today. A lot of the stuff in here, I feel like the drinks are over-sweetened. And I don't care for the versions that he uses in this book. And this is The Essential Cocktail by Dale DeGroff. Again, not calling out Dale DeGroff, just don't particularly care for this book. So these are the D tier. So pretty much everything going forward I have some level of recommendation for. So let's move on to those and move away from the negative. So we're now on to the C tier. This may be the tier that I sort of have the least to say about some of these books. And we're going to start off with one that is very much like that. So this is the International Bartender's Guide. I think this is from the mid-90s, late 90s. I think there's probably a newer version of it. But this is just a nice book, especially if you're not going to have a huge cocktail library. This is going to give you a whole bunch of cocktails. It's not going to give you much information about them, but it's going to tell you how to make them, how to garnish them. And I think it's right more often than it's not right. So I think it's a solid pickup. I think if you are sort of somebody who's really experimenting in cocktails, it's not a bad idea to have this around, because this is probably how, if you go to just a standard bar, if you go to like an Applebee's or whatever, and you order a cocktail, this is probably how they'll make it. Again, kind of for better or worse. The next one is this is Las Vegas Cocktails and New Orleans Cocktails. I haven't been crediting the authors as much as I should. This is Sarah Baird and Sivan Gavish. I don't love these books, but I do think they're kind of interesting. They do talk a little bit about the history, and there's way more of these. These are the two that I have. Again, sort of New Orleans and Las Vegas. They talk a little bit about the cocktail culture and history from those cities. The versions of cocktails that they have listed in here, I largely agree with the way they make them, and I think it's just kind of a, it's a solid pickup. Not my favorite cocktail bookstore, but definitely you're not going to regret them. The next one's kind of a weird one. This is of all the gin joints. So this is sort of at the crossroads of Hollywood and cocktail culture, historical Hollywood and cocktail culture. I think the recipes in here are kind of interesting. There's a few in here that I hadn't seen before, but it kind of puts them in a historical context because obviously Hollywood was big, and a huge cocktail culture throughout throughout history. There's some funny little asides and stories in here. Again, it's not like my favorite book in the world or anything, but I do go back to this every so often and read some of the funny anecdotes. Because if you didn't know, back in the and by the way, that is Edward Hemingway and Mark Bailey, or Edward Hemingway did the illustration and Mark Bailey wrote it. If you didn't know what Hollywood was like back in the 30s and 40s, everything had a very nice clean veneer, but behind the scenes there was a lot of drinking and a lot of other stuff going on, and it kind of talks about some of it. The next one will probably appear to be a bit of a snub because it is a big, important book, and that is Jim Meehan. This is a book that a lot of people talk a lot about, and I think is a very well-regarded book. I have not been super fond of his versions of a lot of the cocktails in here. I think he's obviously, he knows what he's talking about. He's a smart guy. I just didn't, and I don't love the way it's organized. Now, I did talk to a bartender at my local speakeasy who is a kind of a cocktail genius. He said he likes this book a lot more for the advice for bartenders. So I am giving my opinion of this book as a home bartender. If you are in the industry, based on his recommendation, he would probably put this higher, possibly significantly higher. But I don't love the way it's organized a ton. I'm not super fond of all the versions of the cocktails, so it's going to go in C. It can't go any lower than C because I think, again, there's a ton of information in there. I just not my favorite. Next is Mezcal. This was kind of on the low end, or on the high end of C tier, going up to B tier. I really did enjoy this book. There are some great little Mezcal cocktails in here. I don't know. This one I might have should have put it up into the B tier because I do enjoy this book. But it's a good one. Again, not my top tier, but a very good cocktail book. Especially, it's obviously fairly focused towards Mezcal. Finally, Brooklyn Bartender: Modern Guide to Cocktails and Spirits. That's Carrie Jones. That was Emma Jansen. I'm sorry. It's just, I think, a fairly standard little cocktail book. I'm not super impressed with all the versions of the cocktails in there, but I have made a couple of them. There's a lot of pictures in this one. It's a very colorful sort of book. So if you like the full colors type of thing, you'll probably like this one. But anyway, that is my C tier. So now we're going to move into the cocktail books that I definitely recommend, and I recommend some of these. For different reasons, but these are sort of recommended with maybe some degree of qualification. But let's go into the ones I recommend without qualification. All right, so now we're on to B tier. So all these books I recommend. You don't have to go out and buy all of them all at once, but I think all of these are really good for varying numbers of reasons. The first one is kind of weird because this is bitters, and this is Brad Thomas Parsons, who I talked about before. This is sort of less a cocktail book, although there are good cocktails in here. But it is a book about the history of bitters, and sort of talks about different types of bitters, and it's really a fascinating read. So I put this on at B tier partially because I think the history that he talks about is really important, and he writes it very well, and it's very approachable. But it's also got really good cocktails in there too. So Brad Thomas Parsons is one of my favorites, and this is a good one, especially if you're not real familiar with bitters. This is a good pickup, and you'll definitely be glad you did. Okay, next up is Phillips Green: A Drinkable Feast. So this is Cocktail Companion to 1920s Paris. I kind of like cocktail books like this that are very sort of narrowly focused. So this is literally just about cocktails that were created in Paris in the 1920s. So that is, so when we're talking about our historical cocktail books, you've got the Waldorf Astoria Bar book and the Savoy Hotel Cocktail both came out in 1930 and 1935. Obviously, in Europe, they didn't have prohibition, so the cocktail movement was able to move forward with much less problems than here in the U.S. There's a lot of fun little history in here. This is one of those books, like another book that I'm going to talk about in the S tier, where you can read this one of two ways. You can read this book just straight through as you would a normal book, or you can use it as sort of instructions, where you go to whatever cocktail that you're looking for that particular moment, and just read up on that. And it reads both ways just very, very well. So yeah, Drinkable Feast by Philip Green. I enjoyed that one a lot. So now my fellow YouTubers. I got two fellow YouTubers that I put on the list because I like both of their books. The first one is Steve the Bartender, Cocktail Guide. This one, I just love the way it's organized. There's very, very nice pictures, full-page pictures of the cocktail. There is the recipe and how to make it, and nothing else. So it is a very simple book to follow and to get into, and you can tell very quickly if you've done the drink right because it shows you how to do it. It's minimalistic, which is something that I'm kind of a fan of. So if you like that, yes, Steve the Bartender, Cocktail Guide. I enjoyed that one. Nick Fisher is Cocktail Chemistry YouTube channel. I like him. He's a little bit more experimental, I think, than Steve the Bartender is. By the way, it's not a competition. They're both in the same tier. I'm not saying one's better than the other. But I think that these actually both work very well together. Because I think Steve the Bartender is going to give you a very standard way of making the cocktail. And then if you look in Cocktail Chemistry, they'll probably be like maybe a more elevated sounds like it's better, but a sort of a different version of it. And so you can use these two books together, and I think you'll like both of them. That's Nick Fisher, Cocktail Chemistry. Next up, we have Black Mixcellence by Tamika Hall with Colin Asper-Apia, which I'm probably mispronouncing that, and I apologize. This I don't have anything real specific to say. I like a lot of the versions of the cocktails they have in there. They have a lot of interesting little takes on sort of more classic cocktails. Yeah, I've made several cocktails out of this book on the channel, and I've liked all the versions of the cocktails I've made out of here, and it's a good book. I recommend it. Next we have Southern Teague. I'm just here for the drinks. This is kind of an interesting one because he's not really attempting to cover a ton of the classics. I mean, there are some classics in here too, but he's just got some of his own cocktails that he's made, and I think sometimes you sort of get sick of seeing 7 different versions of this classic cocktail with very slight variations. And this is nice because it just kind of gets you into a different headspace, and you're just making a different kind of cocktail. So not real complex, but I enjoyed that one a lot, and I've liked the cocktails that I've made out of it. So the next one I feel like might be a little controversial, but I think that this is definitely B tier. And I've got 2 of them here. There's a bunch of them. That is the Difford's Guides. So I have the 6th and the 11th editions. Between the two, I would recommend the 6th. I like the versions in there better. We talked about the International Bartender's Guide before. This is like that, but much more. So in here, not only do you get, I think this is over 2,000 cocktails, but you do get a little bit about each one. And the 6th edition even has a nice little index in the back where you can, if you can find it, yeah, where you can actually look up a specific kind of liqueur or liquor or whatever, and it'll list all the cocktails in the book that use that liqueur, and they all have a ranking system. It's not real complicated. It's just real simple, but very usable. And a lot of times, this is really the first place I'll go when I'm curious about a new cocktail, because it will give me a very standard recipe, which I sometimes agree with and sometimes don't. There are definitely versions of cocktails in this book that I don't care for. But it's a really great starting place because it'll tell you usually something about the time frame of when it was made, and it'll also give you an idea of the ingredients, and then you can kind of do your research going on from there. So yeah, Difford's Guide. Again, I use the 11th edition, or excuse me, the 6th edition. I've got the 11th edition, but I prefer this one. So this is definitely a good pickup. Okay, now we're on to my A tier. The second, this is sort of, and I should mention what S tier means. A tier is basically a great cocktail book. No complaints at all. You should get it. Great cocktail book. to get into the S tier, it needs to be something kind of special. There needs to be something unique about it that sort of gets into that category. These are all really, really great cocktail books. Highly recommend all of them. Starting off is Gary Regan's The Joy of Mixology. This one is it's just solid across the board. I like all the versions of the cocktails in here. I feel like it is very dense as far as containing a lot of information. It's just a really good, I've liked the version of it. Yeah, it's just a real nice, simple, not super graphically intense. It just sort of gives you the information you need and does it in a very readable kind of way. So yeah, Gary Regan's Joy of Mixology. Next, we're going to talk about Brad Thomas Parsons again. This is Amaro. This has a lot of really, really interesting cocktails that I probably wouldn't have come across without this book. Amaros are something that are not super popular here in the U.S. I think they're becoming more popular over time, but right now I don't feel like they're incredibly popular. And this just really gets you a lot of information on these things. There's a ton of drinks in here that I really like. Yeah, Brad Thomas Parsons, Amaro. Really like that book a lot. Yeah, if you've watched this channel for any time at all, I'm sure you've heard of Smuggler's Cove. That's Martin Cate and Rebecca Cate. It's the tiki book you need to get. You know, if you only get one tiki cocktail book, get this one, because it has just a million cocktails in here. It gets very much into the weeds as far as what rums to be using in each one of these cocktails. It is incredibly comprehensive. Just a really, really solid tiki book. Next we have Cocktail Codex, and this is from Death & Co. Bar. This comes at, it sort of comes at as a cocktail book from a different perspective. It sort of talks about the 6 like primary drinks: the old fashioned, the martini, the daiquiri, the sidecar, the whiskey highball, and the flip. And then it will sort of branch off, each chapter branches off from that original cocktail into a whole bunch of other things and how they all kind of fit together. If you are an OCD person like me, you will like this because it kind of organizes cocktails into a kind of a model that makes it a little bit more easy to understand. So yeah, Cocktail Codex by Death & Co. So the next one is this is an A-tier cocktail book. It is also kind of a coffee table book, and that is the Aviary Cocktail Book. The Aviary is a bar in Chicago that I'm sure I've mentioned on the channel before. It's a really, really amazing bar. Their cocktails, they are molecular mixologists. They do all sorts of really, really crazy stuff. This is the best cocktail book you will ever buy, and you will never actually make a drink out of it. Many of the drinks in here are very, very complicated and require a lot of preparation time, but I still have to put it in here because they're amazing cocktails. And this is something where, you know, once a year or once every 6 months, just do the prep work and make a cocktail out of here. And you'll definitely get a sense of accomplishment. So yeah, the Aviary Cocktail Book, really, really good book. Glad I have it. But now we're going to move on to our S tier. So as I said before, for S tier books, they have to be not only great cocktail books, but they have to be something above being a great cocktail book. The first one we're going to talk about is Dave Arnold's Liquid Intelligence. This is a technique book in many ways. It will talk about stuff that you will probably never use. I do not own a centrifuge, and I doubt you own a centrifuge, but if you wanted to buy a centrifuge for cocktail making, Dave Arnold will tell you how to do that. It is just an exhaustive book about various cocktail techniques. It's very well illustrated, where it will show you pictures of the things it's telling you to do throughout the stages. So like for this is talking about cucumber martini, and it's literally showing you exactly how to cut the cucumber to make the cocktail properly. This book is, you can tailor it to your skill level. Again, when he talks about the centrifuge and some of that stuff that's going to be kind of far beyond you, or what you want to be doing, just ignore that and just pay attention to the other stuff. Really one of the first books you should be getting if you're getting into home bartending. The next one, again, I've talked about it a million times on the channel, and that is Dave Wondrich's Imbibe. This is a history book and a cocktail book at the same time, and I think it serves both really, really well. I sort of talked about the Paris cocktail book and it being kind of, you could either read it straight through as a history book and it'll read fine that way, or you can just go section by section to the things you're interested in. I mean, Wondrich is basically the #1 scholar in cocktails right now. I don't think there's really anybody that's kind of on that level. This will tell you how to make those original versions of those cocktails, and it's just a fun read. He's a fun writer. The last one is not a cocktail book, controversially, but I think it is probably the most important book I bought when I started getting into mixology, and that is Karen Page and Andrew Dornenberg's The Flavor Bible. This is an incredibly simple book in many ways. If you go into this book, you will simply see a series of food items and flavors, and it will tell you what flavors are complementary to those. If you are going to be making your own cocktails, this is a huge help. If you're trying to make something with like Applejack, for example, which I like Applejack a lot, go to the apple section and you can see that cherries, cream and ice cream, coriander, fennel are all things that are going to go well with that. Well, then I can start looking at my liqueurs and looking at my ingredients and trying to build a cocktail based on those complementary flavors. So the Flavor Bible is one of the most important books I have when it comes to designing cocktails. If you're not going to be designing your own cocktails, this isn't maybe as necessary, but I think it will help you appreciate cocktails better, even though this book isn't even written specifically for making cocktails. I think it's just great, and I highly recommend getting it. Honestly, this is a good one to have even if you're not even going to be making cocktails, if you're just going to be cooking for yourself. This will make your gastro life better. So yes, the Flavor Bible, cannot recommend it enough. And on that bombshell, I want to thank everybody for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Have a good drink. Have a good day.